thank you very much. And thank you for being here
Sure.
and doing this. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from Washington, D.C., but lived all over the country and started at Fox about 7 years ago. I know one of the most impressive things I've read about you is you raised 6 kids on a basketball team with one on the bench. I appreciate you for being here. I want to start with, it's interesting how the committee has now had to adjust now that it's April 1st, and the President Xi has said that he wants China to be the 51st state getting in front of Canada.
We'd welcome that.
No, that's a joke. It's April Fool's Day. No, in the real discussion, thank you. In the real discussion, you took the gavel for this committee, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party about a year ago. What is the top priority this year, and what do you hope to accomplish, by the end of this year?
Sure. Well, we're going to focus on our legislative agenda, which includes some of the outbound investment priorities, as well as looking at ways we can promote economic reciprocity, but also innovation that can help the United States lead and stay ahead of China. And so we'll work on the economic front, some of the human rights issues with respect to Xinjiang and the genocide that's happening against the Uyghur Muslim population. It affects supply chains that we've become dependent on in the United States. So our goal is going to be to shine a spotlight on this relationship with China, how it needs to be reset economically as well as the military threats, and help the American people understand the threat that they pose to our way of life.
Are you going to do that through reports, through legislation? How is this? It's a message, obviously, but how is action going to happen?
Sure. We have an investigative team that is second to none. We were the ones who investigated the fentanyl crisis and proved the link to China, where they are actually subsidizing fentanyl precursors being manufactured in China, then going to Mexico, and then coming across our southern border. So we're going to continue investigations. We do have subpoena power, but we're also going to have hearings. We just had a hearing on robotics and looked at American innovation, what some of the barriers are in this area, and then how China strategically operates in this sphere. So we'll have hearings, and we'll continue to, do different trips around the country and also overseas, looking at the military situation. Today, China is doing military exercises around Taiwan, and we need to be prepared with a peace through strength strategy that deters aggression.
So it was President Trump in his first term in 2017 that sort of brought China as a major threat to the United States as well as the globe, and got people talking about China and what to do on that next. Why do you think, that was 2017, why do you think we're still dealing with some of the same issues out of China with their actions, their behavior, and our responses? Why do you think we're dealing with this?
Well, I think China's been brilliant in terms of their public relations campaign to make themselves look very different than what they are. So if you look at President Xi, he would say he's cooperating with the United States on the fentanyl problem. At the same time, they're subsidizing the manufacturing of that. They have different engagement meetings with high-level officials, and, the meeting itself is a success for Xi Jinping because it looks like he's this magnanimous leader, but at the same time, they're threatening Taiwan by force if necessary, and so I think they've done a very good job at that. Many of us still view China as a developing country that's developing peacefully. When you look at their massive wartime footing military buildup, that's no longer the case. And we need to reset our trade relationship because we're actually enriching China through our investment policies as well.
Yeah, you talk about that trade. The threat of tariffs in 2019 brought China to the table to create the Phase 1 trade deal. The Biden administration came in and didn't do much with the Phase 1 trade deal. We were dealing with COVID at that period. And the Chinese then backed off the reforms that they had actually started to make at the end of 2019, 2020 in this. So how do you then keep a constant message and pressure on China so they don't just wait out another administration?
Well, I think President Trump is off to a very strong start in this area through some of the national security memorandums, looking at outbound investment, export controls, eliminating some of the de minimis exemptions. But we have to translate that into law. And that's why it's important that we work in a bipartisan way to look at America's interests and have a regime that actually is sustained throughout future administrations as well.
Is it a form of report? How do you translate to the next chairman, not that you're leaving, the next chairman of the committee, to the next administration that comes in? How do you keep that message consistent then?
Well, take outbound investment for an example. We came very close to having that go all the way across both the House and the Senate and signed into law right at the end of last year's term. Right now, we're working in a bipartisan way, both House and Senate, and we're also building on the new national security memorandum that the Trump administration has put out. So I feel that right now we're in a very good place to accomplish that. And once that's set in law, future administrations will have to adhere to that law as well.
Yeah, on that point, Senator Chuck Schumer, the House Minority Leader, he said in January, we should be focused on going hard against competitors who rig the game like China. So he supports the tariffs on China specifically. For example, there seems to be a lot of bipartisan support for actions countering China's moves. How do you build upon that?
Well, our goal as a committee is to be a force multiplier. We have multiple committees in Congress, whether it's Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce or Foreign Affairs, that work in this space. And our goal is to focus on this competition with China, make sure we win it by empowering those committees with good legislation and good information to move forward. Because ultimately, when it comes to something like outbound investment, you want to have the private sector, have very clear parameters. So there's no guesswork. They know what is acceptable, what isn't. And that takes time. It takes input from stakeholders so that we get a good product at the end and people can work with it.
So in January, the committee submitted its first bipartisan bill, the one to revoking China's permanent normal trade status. Why is that important? That label gets removed off of China?
Well, there's nothing normal about our trade relationship with China. When you look at the way they have cheated the system, they will subsidize, they will, steal technology, IP, they will have all sorts of unfair trade practices. And so we need to recognize that, just acknowledge that, and then reset the relationship. So there's a very different expectation. And I think that's what President Trump's tariffs are going to do, is to force this negotiation to reset this trading relationship.
What's changed between the administrations and in terms of your committee and the work that it's done? Is it easier now?
I don't know if it's easier. I will say that we have some of our committee staff have gone into the administration and are in key places that we're going to be able to work very closely. A couple of our committee members have gone to the Senate, so that's going to deepen our relationship with the Senate. So I do think that we're going to work closely, in a bipartisan way, but also with the administration and the Senate better than we have in the past. Now, at the same time, the Democrats have a strategy that they want to resist everything President Trump is trying to do. And so we are going to run into that to some degree in this work. And my hope is that we can separate the politics from the long-term sustainable policy that is in America's interest and keep it on a bipartisan level.
Is there an issue on the committee then you think that can break through that? What is the issue, I should say?
Well, I think on the outbound investment area, there is bipartisan agreement that we want to get something done. Now, there could be differences in approaches and all that, but I think we can work through that. I had a conversation yesterday with different members of the Democratic caucus, and it was kind of the range of political ideologies all wanting to be part of this legislation that we're working on. And so to me, that's a good sign that we're building a consensus and support.
In your mind, are you cutting off outbound investment then, or are you limiting it?
We've got to stop enriching our adversary, and we need to make sure that we are not enabling their military machinery to continue to grow at our expense that could actually threaten the men and women in our armed forces. And so we're looking at different sectors, whether it's AI, quantum, could be battery technology, it could be hypersonic missiles. We don't want to have, the highest end chips going in to China. We don't want to be investing in their businesses that partner with the People's Liberation Army. At the same time, we create these entity lists that identify specific companies, but you also have to have kind of a balance between that and a sector approach. And that's where it gets complicated because they will change the names of companies. Right. They will try and find ways to work around it with other countries. So that's why we're trying to be very, do our due diligence before we put it into law.
I want to drill down on rare earth minerals. That's been a big topic recently. At the moment, China controls about 60% of the rare earth mining and about 80% of the processing. So even if you don't mine it in their country, you have to basically send it to China. Why is that a bad thing?
Why is that a bad thing?
Why is that a bad thing?
Well, first of all, our military has become dependent on our foremost adversary. Our manufacturing has become dependent. And they are willing to cut off access to these minerals. So whether it's germanium, gallium, graphite, antimony, they've already demonstrated they're willing to do that. Even during COVID, they were willing to cut off PPE, during critical times when they viewed it as in their interest. So I think it's important that we rely on our own ingenuity, our own manufacturing capabilities, develop more mining and extraction and processing, and then work with allies, like-minded allies that we can trust and work with that give us, the economies of scale that we might need.
The hard part for the U.S. is it's hard to get those projects up and running, permitting. It takes forever to get those projects going. Through the committee, is there anything you can do or are looking at doing to speed up the process to build that industry, the rare earth industry here in the U.S.?
We had a critical minerals working group last year. Rob Whitman and Kathy Castor co-chaired. And it was very successful, recommended 3 pieces of legislation in this arena. It was right towards the end of the year that the legislation came out, and we're going to work on passing those bills. We're also going to work with the administration. I think, when you look at Doug Burgum, his background, his understanding of these issues, there's a team in place that I think is going to be really helpful. Bruce Westerman in the House, our Natural Resources Chairman, he's fantastic. And I think there will be a lot of people working together on this, Mike Lee in the Senate, and I'm very optimistic we'll get some permitting reform done.
And even in the shipping of rare earth minerals, China has influences in U.S. ports through technology. It seems to be their long-term plan that they'll build up a market, dump the product on the market, run the U.S. companies out of business, sort of the long-term strategy there, and then saturate the U.S. with parts and technology. And Chinese technology is prevalent at U.S. ports. Is that a vulnerability?
It really is. These ship-to-shore cranes, 80% of them Chinese. What we discovered is there was actually a cellular modem placed on these cranes that could monitor what was going in and out of the ports, control different aspects of it. That was not part of the specification. So that was something that China, in this area of backdoors into technology is something we're seeing over and over again, whether it's robotics. We're heavily dependent on drones from China, even in our law enforcement. There's many areas, the ports were one of the most surprising to me because I had no idea how dependent we were on China until we came out with a report that and then identified this pre-positioned cellular modem on these cranes.
So it surprises you. What could they gain from that information?
I think, they've become a surveillance state and they are exporting that all over the globe and helping dictators in other countries surveil their people. But they want to understand what's happening in America. So, it could be LiDAR technology where they're mapping. It can be, the ports. It can be, what do you call the internet modems?
The hacker, absolutely, yeah. In the hardware, Huawei is something that we kept out.
And even most recently when there was some hacking that went on, there was the Salt Typhoon and the Volt Typhoon. They actually placed malware on civilian infrastructure in the United States in order to be able to disrupt at a time of their choosing. And so you see, that's basically cyber warfare, and they're conducting this on a wide technological area.
So we know what's happening. The administration calls it out, Congress calls it out, members of your committee call it out. Why does it keep happening then? How come we can't stop this?
Well, we have a dependence, and we need to break that dependence. We need to work with our allies. We need to encourage American innovation. We need to reset this relationship and reset the expectations. I think, every now and then someone will say to me, when it came to technology in China, whether it was TikTok or other technologies, why does that matter? The U.S. is probably spying on us, what? And that's where we need to make it very clear the difference between the Chinese Communist Party and a freedom-loving country where the government's role is to secure our rights here in this country. In China, the people have no rights. And right now they are referring to the president of Taiwan during these military exercises as a bug. And it reminds me very much of Rwanda when they were, the conflict happening there, and they were calling people cockroaches and dehumanizing. And we have a very different view of human dignity, and that's why it's important to stay ahead and win this competition.
You talk about TikTok. How important do you think is it that, should that app be shut down? Let's start there.
TikTok, ByteDance is the parent company. It's affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. By law, they are required to divest. And I believe that the law also requires the algorithm to be inaccessible to any Chinese influence. And to me, that's going to be important to follow the law. President Trump is working on a negotiation. Hopefully, there will be a sale that will protect it for American users, protect their data, no longer allow CCP to have access to that data, and also prevent our young people from being influenced by a foreign adversary.
But you have a number of, it's not just TikTok now, you have Temu, which has similar privacy rules where they can look at anything in your phone, all your messages, all your emails, and you have DeepSeek, the AI. How big of a concern is that for you, that this is multiplying with the amount of surveillance that can be done on Americans?
Yeah, well, TikTok is sort of the camel with the nose in the tent, if you will. And it's the surveillance capabilities. And they've misleaded the American public on, what happens with the data and the access. DeepSeek is actually very much upfront that the data is going to be captured in China. So when you look at this, we're talking about it, we need a regulatory effort that prevents this kind of activity and recognizes a threat.
Is that something the committee is going to look at in terms
Absolutely.
of laws, legislation?
Yeah, first we want to see the TikTok divestiture happen, but we also want to make sure that whatever new emerging technologies come forward, that we're able to handle those as well, because this is the tip of the iceberg.
I want to talk about the auto sector with some of the last minutes that we have. China's EV industry has really exploded. For example, between 2017 and 2023, China's exports exploded 13,300% for the amount of EVs. They account for basically 70% of all the global EV production. That's amount to flooding the market with EVs. We don't sell Chinese cars in the US, so why should we be concerned?
Well, I think, their goal will be to replicate their strategy that they've used in other areas, and that is to develop kind of their national champion, heavily subsidize it, make sure their supply chain is heavily subsidized so that they're able, and often will use forced labor to keep costs down, and then they will aggressively dump that in other countries. And you're seeing that happen in Europe right now, and their goal is to do that in the United States. And, so it's unfair trade practices across the board, but they're the first ones to say, when President Trump talks about tariffs and making reciprocity and fairness, that they support this free trade, and they're now becoming advocates. So with China, it's very important to look at what they do, not what they say.
And when you subsidize like that, it make their cars cheaper in other countries. It does squeeze out U.S. car makers, right? If they're trying.
It really does.
And, this is the press.
And quite frankly, our policies with respect to some of the emissions criteria, the EPA over-regulating, I think actually enriched China in this effort. And now we have American companies who are scrambling to keep up with battery technology that was actually invented in the United States and now dominated by China.
I want to end it kind of where we began, not with a joke. On a bipartisan note, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, it seems that both sides of the aisle can come together and agree that something has to be done, and there seems to be some action that's coming out of that. What one thing do you think will happen this year, bipartisan, that will make a difference against what China's doing to the United States?
I think we'll raise the awareness with the American people and the business community that we need a different relationship with China, and we will stop this enriching our greatest adversary, funding our own demise, if you will.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for Safe Summit, allowing me to moderate the discussion. Thank you, Chairman Moolenaar, for doing this. Your candor was much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
appreciate
guys.
it.
Thank you.
Thanks.